G'day there everybody, Stephen from Woolston Web Design. It's been a while since I did my last screencast, but I've come across something recently where I've made some changes to my dev workflow, so I thought I'd share it with all of you. And it's essentially moving away from Visual Studio Professional, moving into Visual Studio Code, but just going to show you a way that I can continue the WordPress pipeline of development that I've previously been using. So we'll jump into that right now. Okay, so let's have a look at what we've got here. You can see I've got a Visual Studio Professional window open. Previously I had been doing all of my WordPress development in Visual Studio Professional, but I came across some issues where, and I'm sure everybody else has come across this as well, where the more and more that you use Visual Studio, if you don't seem to kind of curate it and remove temporary files and so on, it just becomes really huge to manage, to the point where it takes minutes to open. And I just got tired of it because the WordPress workflow that I have, I'm trying to keep it nice and lean, so that I can open my editor, I can make changes, I can deploy, and it can be done really quickly. But when Visual Studio takes that long to actually open, I thought there's got to be a better solution. So I looked at some of the other IDEs. I looked at, Sublime Text and even just Notepad++. But I decided to give Visual Studio Code a crack because it seems to be, well, it's the latest offering from Microsoft. A lot of people seem to be using it and seem to like it. So I thought I would give it a try and see if I can make it work with my WordPress workflow, which I might just describe to you now. So before we jump into the IDEs, I'll just explain to you how my development pipeline works. So I want to keep all of my code in source control, and I'm using Visual Studio Team Services, Visual Studio Online, for all of my source code. So I've got all of that source code in a folder, which is, I just keep it on my C under here, under Web, under WordPress, and these are all of my WordPress themes that I work on. But I didn't want to use IIS for my hosting engine, so I decided to go with XAMPP, I think is how you say it. It's very easy to use. It just serves up content from a directory structure. Now I could have pointed the web server at this folder, but as you know with Visual Studio, if I look at the blank slate, in the project, in here you've got a bin folder, you've got object and properties and all sorts of other files that you don't necessarily want to serve up, even though it is only on a local host. It just becomes a bit messy. So I decided to go with putting all of the websites into a different folder. So I put them into this XAMPP folder, and then the web server points to the htdocs folder. So these are all of my active sites at the moment. So wwd is an instance of my, it's a dev version of my live Woolston Web Design site. And that's how XAMPP works. It just looks at that folder, and whatever you put into that folder, it just serves that up. PHP, whatever type of programming language you want to use, you configure it and it works. So I've got XAMPP working with the MySQL backend. It's using the Apache web server, and I'm using PHP as the programming language for WordPress, obviously. And that works quite nicely. But the issue comes when I make changes here in Visual Studio. Because this is in a different folder to the htdocs folder, I need to deploy the changed files to the web server so that I could then, if I want to do a hot reload or just manual refresh of the page, see the changes that I've made. So that was the issue that I came up with, that I came across. So what I decided to do was incorporate a grunt pipeline. And I'll show you. Let's get out of Visual Studio, and we'll jump into Visual Studio Code. So this is the solution in Visual Studio. So you've got all of these files. You could have a look at it, but just trust me, they are exactly the same. All I've done is I've gone open folder, and I've opened the folder that Visual Studio where the Visual Studio solution is. And now I can manage all of the files in here in exactly the same way as I could have that I was able to do in Visual Studio. So again, the issue we now have is deploying a change that I make to these files to my Apache web server. So Grunt seemed to be the best way to do this, and the simplest way for me with some JavaScript background. It's all JavaScript based. So what I've done is I've created a Grunt file, and I won't go into the details of the Node package manager and installing Grunt and setting up all of the packages and so on. That's something that you can probably research yourself. But suffice to say, these are the packages that I'm using in my Grunt file, and I can share this Grunt file with you if it's something that you want to have a deeper look at. Just send me a message or put a comment underneath, and I will get that to you. So essentially, what we're doing is Compass and CSS min for compiling the SAS files, CSS min for minifying, the watch package to watch for certain files as they change, copy so that I can deploy to the new folder, and uglify is so that I can manage my JavaScript files and I can minify and do things with the JavaScript files. And then the default task that I'm registering is the watch, and then the watch then kicks off the other things. So if I show you that watch command, it's got all of these commands that will trigger once the watch task is triggered. So maybe Grunt is something else that I can describe in a different screencast. If it's something that you want to know more about, let me know, and I can do that. For now, we might just push on with how this deployment is going to work. Okay, so what I want to do is I don't have a site for my blank slate. So what I'm going to do is all I need to do to make Apache serve up this site is to create a folder. It's going to be a WordPress site. So I've already downloaded the WordPress files. I will grab those, deploy them to that new folder that I've created. Okay, and so now we have all of our WordPress files. Now what we need to do is we need to create a database for those files to use. So we'll run up the MySQL admin, we'll create a new database, just call it blank slate. Now blank slate is the kind of vanilla WordPress theme that I use to build all of my client sites on. It's got the default structure, it's got some really base CSS and JavaScript in it, and then I just build on top of that depending on what the customer is looking for. Okay, so blank slate is our database. We've created the Apache files. Now we should just be able to run up that site. Blank slate. Okay, so let's go on, just quickly go through the installation. I might just pause the video and go through, set up everything that I need to set up, and I'll come back. Alright, and we're back. I've gone through, I've just filled in the WordPress information that we need, and we'll let WordPress do its installation. So that should give us the default 2017 theme, I think it is. So I'll just put in username and password that I entered. Okay, and now we've got our base theme set up. So if we come into Appearance and Themes, you'll see we've just got the default WordPress theme. So what we want to do is we want to take my new theme, Blank Slate, and we want to move that over to that Blank Slate website so that it will serve up that theme. Okay, so I might just go through the structure of the project to begin with, because not all of these files are files that we want to be sent over to the web server. You can see there's a bunch of Sass files here. I've got a mixin Sass file, there's a grunt file JavaScript file, there's a couple of JSON files. These project files are obsolete and they're legacy from when we were using Visual Studio. So I don't want all of that stuff to go over. So I've configured my grunt file so that it will only copy over the PHP, the JavaScript, the images, and it will do some. It will do the CSS, the Sass compile, minify, and then copy as well. So that's all part of the grunt setup. But before we can use grunt, we need to configure that particular folder so that it has all of the grunt packages that it needs. So what we will do, and the folder that we're talking about is the folder, the source folder. So that's the folder back here that I was using in Visual Studio. So we don't have node modules folder here, so this hasn't been set up yet. So luckily what I've done, and this just sort of makes it easier for all of the sites that I set up when I create them, I have this batch file. So if I open this batch file and show you what's in it, it's essentially, it runs a bunch of npm commands that install the packages that we need. So instead, initially it's going to set up grunt, it's going to do the compass.js hint, all of the packages that we need. So I'm just going to go through and I'm going to run each of these packages, and I will be back once that's done. So I thought what I would do is I would actually show you how, I'll show you a neat little tool in Visual Studio Code to help us run these npm package files. Previously what I would do is I would run each of these individual installer files from the command line, but Visual Studio Code has got this integrated terminal, which means that you can run those individual the individual packages from within the interface. Now I could probably fix this batch file so that I could just run the batch file and it would run each of these and it would install it all for me magically, but I haven't been able to do that, so I'm still running them all separately. So if I go back to Visual Studio Code, you may need to go to File, Integrated Terminal to bring up the terminal window, but you can just paste that in there, and you can do this with any command line, any command that you want to use, and it will run in here. And by default, when you open it up, it brings you to the path of the project, and it runs sweetly. So I'm just going to go through and I'm going to run each of these individually, and I will come back once it's finished. Okay, so now we have all of those packages installed. I'll just show you again. These are the packages, and they equate to the packages that appear inside my grunt file down here at the bottom. So they're the packages that will run once I instantiate grunt. So now once all of the packages are installed, all we should need to be able to do now is just put focus in the terminal window and run grunt. Now what this is now going to do is it's going to watch for changes to any of the files that I've configured in the grunt file, and it will do a command on those files. So if I just walk you through what's going to happen. So it's watching CSS, PHP and JavaScript files, and it's looking for these type of files. So it's looking for files in the root with an extension of SCSS, and also in the CSS folder of that type. So if I show you our folder structure, so this is CSS and I've got a bunch of Sass files in there. I've got the mixins Sass file, and I've got the mandatory, or I've got the styles Sass file in there. So when a change happens to any of these files, it runs these tasks. So Compass is going to compile the Sass down to CSS. CSS min is going to minify those files, and copy is going to copy those files. Now it's going to copy, and then it's going to use the CSS method of that copy, and I'll come down to that in a second. But take notice of this. I've configured a global path, a source path and a destination path. So when I can reuse this grunt file in any of the projects that I use, and all I have to do is change this location to match the new project that I've created and the destination website folder, and then all of the rest of the grunt configuration and methods continue to work. So it's really nice in that regard. So if we come down here to Compass, so Compass is looking at those two variables that I created at the top, and then it's going to, the CSS min is going to minify, and it's using those variables again. Our variables down here are being used again for the copy. So I'm copying everything that's CSS to that destination location, and the same with PHP and JavaScript and anything inside the images folder as well. So now what we should be able to do is, if I show you if I go back to our Apache source, HTT, and then blank slate. At the moment we've got nothing in there, but if we go to themes, we don't have our blank slate theme. So if I come back to the grunt file, just make sure that we've got this set up right. So we're looking at that, and we're going to, I'm not sure if it's going to create that folder. I might just create that folder anyway, just in case it doesn't. So I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call it blank slate, and that's the destination that it's going to go to. So that's going to create a new theme. So let's make a change to our front page, and all we really need to do is, I'm just going to put an extra line break in there. Now just keep an eye on the terminal window down here. At the moment it just says that it's watching. So if I save that, it detects that there's been a change to the front page PHP file. It's running the copy PHP command. It's copied 35 files, and now it's waiting again. So if I go back to our themes, we now have all of our PHP files. So even in the subfolders, those PHP files have been moved across. So let's do the same with our style. Now, this is a little bit different in that it's not going to create a whole bunch of CSS files. The way that I've got this configured is that the styles CSS does an import of a bunch of other CSS files. So it imports the Bootstrap, because I'm using Bootstrap. That Bootstrap CSS SCSS file is the standard Bootstrap file, which does a whole heap of imports as well. So that's going to import all of that CSS, and then it looks at my core SCSS file, which is this, which I use as kind of like a boilerplate for standard functions and mix-ins and styles that I might use across most of my customer sites, and that also does an import of all of these other SCSS files as well. So carousel, when I want to do some styles that are specific to a carousel, I'm trying to be really specific with the way with where I store my styles. So if it's related to a carousel, it'll be there. If it's related to comments, it'll be there. Footer, front page, header, and so on. I try and obfuscate a lot of the styles into separate files, just so that they're easy to find. And then I do the import here in my core SCSS. And that gets imported into style SCSS here, and then I also bring in my mix-ins. And then here there's just anything that doesn't really fit into those other SCSS files I put in here, or if it's body related or headings, paragraph settings, styles, that kind of thing, that all goes in here as well. So if we make a quick change to this, again, I'm just going to do a line feed, and I will save that. So it's detected a change, it's running Compass, and then I think it'll run CSS min, and then it'll do the copy. And this is the beauty of Grunt. You don't have to worry about minification and you know, stripping out comments, and Grunt is really powerful, and it does a lot of this for you. So if you set up your pipeline properly and efficiently, you can, you just make changes to a file and save, and this deployment method will just do it all for you. So this might take a little while because this is the first time this is run, so it's got to do quite a lot. So while that's running, what else can I show you about my project? Oh, it's running here now. Okay, so it's run CSS min, it's run the copy, and now it's watching again. So let's go back to our blank slate. So now we have our CSS, because in the CSS folder we've got this global CSS file, so that gets copied across, but all of these other files do not get copied across because they were all included in the style CSS. Now the style.css has all of that, all of those styles in it, and a really cool thing that it does is it adds line numbers and it tells you the file that it's coming from. So that's really neat. And then also, if you look at, we also have a minified version of that file as well, which is brilliant. So now what I do, if I show you my header file, what I can do is while I'm in development, I will use a non-minified file, and then as I do my deployment, I will change that to min, but I still need to copy the style.css file up because WordPress needs that. So I copy the style.css as well as the style.min.css, but the minified file is the one that gets included in my header, and that's the one that will be deployed into the DOM when users look at your website. And that's what you want. You want to have minified CSS so that it's, it's quick to download, removes white space, all that kind of stuff. So now I think we probably have everything. Oh no, we don't have images. So that was another thing I wanted to show you. If we go to if we come back to our terminal, instead of just running grunt, we can actually run specific commands. So I'm just going to stop this. I'm going to press Control, put the focus in the terminal, Control C, and say yes, we do want to terminate. So what I wanted to show you is that instead of just running the grunt command, we can run grunt, and then we can run specifically any of these methods that we wanted to. So we could run grunt, and then we could say copy : image, and that will specifically run this copy instance. So if we bring this up and I say copy image, now what that will do is that will run this here. So this will say take all of the files in the images folder and copy to the destination of the variable which we set up at the top of the site, at the top of the grunt file. So now if we go to blank slate, we now have an images file, and we have all of the files that we need within the images file folder. So now I'm pretty sure that's, what else do we need in here? I think there might be some specific WordPressy type things that we need to put in here. So let's just have a look at the difference. So this is the project as it appeared in Visual Studio. I think it needs that screenshot folder, and we need robots, even though, yeah, we need robots and we need the README file. But that's all that we need, and this is just a once-off copy as part of the setup. So we'll copy that across, because this screenshot image here is what WordPress uses to show as an image for the theme. So if we go back to our website now and we refresh this page, we should now see a blank slate theme. And there we go, that's the image that I was talking about. So if I activate that now, and we have a look at the site, it probably won't it won't work, because if I show you how that front page is configured, it's doing a loop of a whole bunch of different category names so that it sets up containers within the page. So, you know, these category names don't exist in that database just yet, which is why the website looks the way that it does. But that gives you an idea on the workflow and the pipeline, and how you can move away from Visual Studio and use Visual Studio Code, which gives you lots of cool benefits, and it's much faster. And instead of being a project-based IDE, you can just open up a folder and away you go, and it still integrates with team services as well. So you can see here, this is my project. As changes get made, it prompts me for changes that I can push up to source control. You still get a lot or most of the great stuff that you get out of Visual Studio, but it's much thinner and it's much quicker to use. So if you've got any questions at all, feel free to ask, and keep up with lots more news and ongoing and current affairs in the development space. Check me out at www.woolston.com.au.